I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. And today we're doing a quick tips episode, which is one of our favorite formats. And we're tackling a topic that I think is incredibly timely as we head into summer. We're talking about how to sew lightweight fabrics like rayon, lawn, voile, and all those gorgeous drapey materials. They're really amazing on the bolt, but can make you want to throw your scissors across the room sometimes. So we've got 5 practical tricks that'll make working with these fabrics so much easier. All right, our icebreaker for today, Haley, tell me about a fabric that completely defeated you the first time you tried to sew with it. You have one of those?
I have a few of those that come to mind immediately. The first time I tried to sew something on the bias, I made a tie of all things. And I just was young and naive, and I didn't understand what types of fabrics were appropriate for ties. And I was like, people make ties in silk. So I'll just go and buy any old silk. I just picked something that I liked the color of. And it was far too open of a weave, and it was stretching horribly. And this tie ended up being 8 feet long. It just was stretching like crazy, even though I had, all of the sew-in interfacing and stuff. And so the interfacing only encompassed half of the length. It was just a whole nightmare. Which was not the fabric's fault. I chose the wrong fabric for the project, and 2, I had zero technique. So that was fun. What about you?
Yeah, I think most tricky fabrics threw me the first time I tried sewing with them, because I have a tendency to just dive into projects without really learning anything. So, I learned by doing for a lot of things. I remember, because I always used to buy the cheapest fabric, of course, when I was a teenager when I first started sewing. And I remember trying to make this top in chiffon, but not just chiffon, but a polyester chiffon.
Oof, rough.
Yeah, oh, it's awful. It's probably the worst fabric you can sew with, because first of all, it's polyester, so it's got all of the drawbacks of polyester, including that it won't take a press, and won't behave like you want it to. And then it's also super lightweight, so it's shifting all over the place and really hard to handle, and just shreds as well. It was terrible. It was just a complete disaster, and it made me never want to sew with a lightweight fabric again until I learned that there are other options besides polyester chiffon.
Imagine that.
Yeah, but it's like those costume fabrics that you start out with when you're just getting started with sewing. At least I did. But now I know a few techniques. I have a few tools and a few techniques that help me out. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that today, and how to make things easier on yourself. Well, if you have an icebreaker question for a future episode for us, you can leave it in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, or you can leave it in a comment on Spotify, and we'll answer it in a future episode. So let us know if you have any questions that we can include here. All right, well, let's talk about lightweight fabrics, because I think summer is really when all the most beautiful fabrics come out, in my opinion. Well, maybe except for in fall, you've got some beauties too. You've got a lot of those nice wools, but I think in summer, all those nice lightweight fabrics are perfect for summer sewing. And you just walk into a fabric store, or you're scrolling through an online fabric store maybe, and everything is just kind of calling your name. Those really beautiful floral rayon chalets, or a thin cotton lawn, or a floaty silk cotton voile. Those are some of my favorites. And then you buy it and you bring it home and you unroll it on your cutting table, and that's when the trouble starts, because it won't stay still, and it shifts when you cut, and it puckers when you sew, and it stretches when you press. And by the time you're done, you feel like the fabric won. And I think a lot of people have one bad experience with a slippery, lightweight fabric and then just avoid them, which is such a shame because there's really, you know, these fabrics make the most beautiful and comfortable summer garments. And I think that the thing is, it's not that these fabrics are impossible, it's that they require a slightly different approach than what you might be used to. And once you know the tricks, it really does change everything. And this is something I feel strongly about. Whenever you hit a wall in sewing, the answer almost always comes down to either the right tool or the right technique. And with lightweight fabrics, it's a bit of both. So let's get into it. Haley, what lightweight fabrics do you gravitate most towards in the summer?
I love a cotton lawn or voile.
Hmm.
I feel like they are delicate enough, but they fit my lifestyle really well.
Hmm.
I like a rayon challis, but I tend to like that more for um, not like more occasion things, not like a wedding or something, but like a date night skirt or something like that, but not necessarily as much everyday wear.
Yeah. I really like you're saying, I really like a sheer cotton
Mhm.
because it has that kind of floaty effect, but cotton is inherently a little bit more casual
Mhm.
than something like a silk or even like a rayon. So I think those are really nice, lightweight summer fabrics. I recently got a rayon georgette also, so it's a little bit sheer, so
Ooh.
lighter than like a rayon challis, and I'm thinking about how best to use that. Um, I think for something like that, when you're dealing with these lightweight fabrics and these sheer fabrics, you do have to think a little bit about the shapes because they do tend to work better with, I think, a little bit looser shape. So
Mhm.
um, I'm just kind of considering different patterns for it right now, but that's another kind of more recent favorite.
Is there a specific type of project where you think lightweight fabric really shines?
I think it depends on how lightweight it is.
Yeah.
I think for the very lightweight fabrics, like the sheer fabrics, like a chiffon or a georgette or something like that, I think they really shine in anything that's more like loose and flowing or has some volume to it, like a full skirt or something like that.
Mhm.
Something where the fabric can really float instead of being constricted or,
Yeah.
being controlled. I think that's where they do really well. I think if it's something that has a little bit more structure, like you were talking about lawns or walls, those can work in a variety of different shapes.
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
you think?
I agree. I think like a little bit more ease is really complementary to lightweight fabrics. Another place where they really shine is when they're cut on the bias in a more
Mhm.
body skimming
Yeah,
fit. I
that's a
think
good point.
that can be um really lovely. But that's just kind of like a different technique for allowing them to flow
Mhm.
organically. I think you want to give your lightweights room to move.
Yeah.
The bias allows that room
Mhm.
by like the function of, you know, the stretch and movement that it has.
Yeah. I think the point is, like, you're not creating too much
Yeah.
dark control. Alright, well, let's start with some tips here. These are gonna make it a lot easier to work with these kinds of fabrics. The first one is to stabilize your fabric before you cut. And this is the very first place things tend to go wrong, but it's also the easiest to fix. So, lightweight fabrics shift. They tend to slide around on your cutting surface. They can bunch up under your rotary cutter, and your pattern pieces can move around. And by the time you finish cutting, your pieces are slightly off, and that can compound into fit problems later. Or things are off grain and they just hang weird on your body. They twist or they're not hanging straight. So the first thing I do is use a cutting surface that has a little bit of grip. So if you have a self-healing cutting mat, that really helps. That's what I have at home. If you don't, you can even lay a flat bed sheet underneath the fabric to give it something to cling to instead of sliding across a smooth table. And that can help a little bit. Second, use pattern weights instead of pins when you can. So every time you pin into a slippery fabric, you're creating a little bit of distortion around that pin. And the weights keep everything flat and still. And then third, this is really a game changer if you aren't doing this, but consider cutting a single layer instead of folding the fabric. So I know that takes a little bit longer, but when you're working with really slippery fabrics, that folded layer shifts no matter what you do. So cutting single layer gives you much more accurate pieces. And if you're cutting something on the bias, like Haley was just talking about, you definitely want to cut single layer. But it seems like it's going to be a little bit harder, take a little bit more time, but really it saves you so much frustration that it's really worth it, and you'll find that it doesn't actually end up taking more time because of that. And some people like to use a spray starch or a light spray stabilizer before cutting. Some brands of this are Best Press or Sullivan's spray stabilizer. That's the one I use. You spray it on, you let it dry, and the fabric becomes just a little bit stiffer and easier to handle. So it becomes almost a little bit more papery, but it's not super stiff. It's just stiff enough to make it a little bit easier to work with, and then it washes right out later. The thing with this is you want to make sure that if you're putting it on, like, for example, silk or something, make sure that you've pre-washed it, and that you're planning to wash it later and not dry clean it, because obviously you need to wash out the spray stabilizer. So you just want to make sure that it's been washed before you apply the spray stabilizer as well. And the key here, really, when it comes to cutting, is just spend a little extra time at the cutting stage, and you save yourself a lot of frustration everywhere else.
Definitely. I think that's the theme with sewing,
Mm-hmm.
delicate things in general.
Yeah.
Next, let's talk about preventing puckered seams. I think this is one of the number one complaints that I hear from people working with lightweight fabrics. You sew like a beautiful straight seam, and then you flip it over and it's all puckered and wavy. And it's so discouraging because you feel like you did everything right. Puckering usually comes from one of a few things: the wrong needle, too much tension, or the feed dogs are like pulling unevenly on the very light fabric. So let's start with your needle. Make sure that you're switching to a smaller size. A 68 or a 7010 universal or microtex needle is usually ideal for lighter weight fabrics. Big needles on fine fabrics, it's kind of like using like a big fat marker to write on tissue paper. You're just gonna punch holes in your fabric that are that are large and that the thread can't really fill properly, and so this can cause you to get some distorted effects. Next, you'll want to check your tension. A lot of machines come set with a tension that works really well for more medium weight, stable cotton fabrics, and then lighter weight fabrics need a little bit less tension. So you can try lowering your top tension just a little bit. Oftentimes, a half a number to a full number will do the trick here. Just make sure that you're noting the change that you're making, so that you can reset it back to regular afterwards. And of course, always test on a scrap piece of fabric. And then we also want to think about what's happening underneath your presser foot. Lots of times, lightweight fabrics get pushed down into the needle plate by the feed dogs, almost like it's being swallowed by the needle plate. Two things help. You can use a straight stitch needle plate if your machine has one, because of the smaller hole, it gives the fabric more support. You can also, I know some people have luck with placing a small piece of painter's tape over the needle hole, so that they can kind of like rig a straight stitch throat plate onto their machine if they don't have access to one. Another thing that can really work is to shorten your stitch length slightly, to like about 2 millimeters. Sometimes even smaller can work pretty well. And then one more trick that can work really well and make a really big difference is to sew with some tissue paper or a thin tearaway stabilizer underneath your fabric along the seam line. The stabilizer gives the feed dog something to grip onto that isn't your delicate fabric. And then you just tear it away after you're done sewing. And I always, always, always tell people to test on scraps first. All of those scraps that you get when you're cutting your fabric out or your project out, save some of those so that you can sew some test seams, um, s- your straight stitch, but also your seam finish. Um, it takes like 2 minutes and it tells you can make all of those adjustments before you damage your precious project.
Yeah. One thing that I always tell people to do that is I think is really helpful, um, this is kind of what you were just talking about, Haley, is testing on scraps and keeping those scraps from your cutting. I like to keep a scrap right next to my machine while I'm sewing.
Mhm.
Like, just as part of my cutting, I cut out a little, like, rectangle of the same fabric and keep it to the right of my machine because a lot of times when you're sewing, I'm sure you guys have experienced, you'll get something like a thread nest or a broken thread or something goes wrong, and then you have to rethread your machine or adjust something. And then you don't want to go right back to your project, right?
Mhm.
Because then what if it's still messed up? What if you get another thread nest? Then you have to unpick it. So I always like to have a scrap next to me so I can test any changes that I made before I go back to my regular project. So that's just a little bonus tip there. Next tip is to choose the right seam finish. So, seam finishing is one of those things that doesn't seem like it matters that much until you put the garment in the wash and the insides start fraying into some kind of a fuzzy mess. So, lightweight fabrics fray. Some of them fray aggressively. Rayon, in particular, can unravel really quickly if you don't finish your seams. But here's the catch. Some seam finishes that work great on medium weight fabric can be a little bit too bulky or too heavy for lightweight material. So, a standard zigzag, for example, on a really fine cotton lawn or like a batiste or something like that, can look lumpy and feel sort of stiff along the seam. So, my favorite seam finish for lightweight fabrics is a French seam. So, fully encloses the raw edge. So, there's zero fraying and it looks incredibly clean on the inside. And it also adds very little bulk because you're trimming the first seam allowance down so small. And French seams do take a little bit more time because you're sewing each seam twice, but the result is worth it. And the kind of simple patterns we talked about in our last episode, so things like tees and tanks and simple dresses, you usually don't have that many seams to begin with. So it's a really great choice for a lot of summer sewing. But if French seams feel like too much, another option is a narrow rolled hem on your serger if you have one, and you can use that as a seam finish. It's fast and it wraps the edge really neatly. You can also just do a regular serged edge on a lot of lightweight fabrics. The only thing you want to be careful of if your fabric is sheer, you will be able to see that stitching through the fabric. So just make sure that's something that you're okay with. And for curved seams, where French seams can get kind of tricky, a Hong Kong finish with a really lightweight bias strip is really beautiful, though it is more time intensive. You can even use like an organza, so something that's sheer and very, very lightweight, so it doesn't add too much bulk. The big idea is to match your seam finish to the weight and behavior of your fabric. So you just don't want to default to whatever you usually do. You want to adapt to the fabric itself.
Well, speaking of all of these seam finishes, let's talk about pressing. This is a big ingredient to our
Yeah.
seam finishes. Pressing lightweight fabric can honestly kind of feel like a trap. Like you have to press your seams. That's obviously non-negotiable for a really clean result. But every time you touch the iron to your fabric, you risk stretching it out of shape or leaving shine marks or creating new wrinkles that weren't there before. So that can be really frustrating. The first rule is that you want to lower your iron temperature. Just because a fabric is a natural fiber does not mean that it needs high heat. So, rayon in particular can develop a shiny, almost scorched look if you press it too hot. So, start on a lower setting and then work your way up if you need to. Next, you'll want to make sure that you're using a press cloth like every single time. Even if you think you don't need it, a press cloth protects the surface of the fabric from direct heat and from water spots as well if you're using steam. A simple piece of muslin or even a clean, like flour sack towel work perfectly. You could also use a piece of silk or organza that is really useful because it allows you to see your project underneath. And that is a tip from the pros. And then third, press, don't iron. This distinction really matters because lightweight fabric, um, ironing means that you're sliding the iron across the fabrics, and that sliding motion stretches and distorts delicate material. So pressing means that you're lifting the iron, you're setting it down, you press, and then you lift it up, and then repeat that. It's like a straight up and down motion, not a dragging motion like ironing is. And this can really make a difference in your results. And then finally, you want to make sure that you're allowing your fabric to cool and dry before you move it. Lightweight fabrics are really vulnerable to stretching when they're warm and damp. So if you press a seam open and then immediately pick it up to keep sewing, it can stretch out. So give it a few seconds to cool on the pressing surface before you move on to your next step.
That's a good one. That's one a lot of people I think don't know, and I've definitely been guilty of picking it up too fast because I'm not always the most patient person.
Yeah, I'm always in a rush. So
Next, choose a hem that works with the drapes. We talked about seam finishes before. Hems are the last thing you do, and if you've done everything else right, you don't want to ruin it right at the finish line. And with lightweight fabrics, hems can be a little bit tricky. So the challenge is that your typical folded hem, where you fold the edge under twice and then stitch, it can add weight and stiffness to the bottom of a garment that's supposed to flow and drape. And suddenly the hem has this rigid, structured feeling, and the rest of the garment is floating around it, and it looks a little bit off. So a narrow rolled hem is my go-to for lightweight fabrics. So you're folding under a very small amount, about a quarter inch or even less, and you get a clean edge without adding bulk. And there's a little bit of a learning curve with rolled hems, but once you get the feel for it, it's fast and the result is beautiful. A rolled hem foot for your machine makes this dramatically easier. It's just one of those specialty presser feet that I think is 100% worth owning if you sew with lightweight fabrics regularly. It folds the fabric for you as you sew so that you don't have to press that tiny fold first. Um, Another option that works really well for very floaty fabrics is a lettuce hem, where you stretch the fabric slightly as you serge or zigzag the edge, and it creates kind of a wavy, ruffled effect. It's not right for every garment or for every fabric, but for kind of a casual summer top or a dress, it can be really fun. It looks really nice with like a rib knit, for example, or if you're doing like a gauze fabric that has a natural stretch to it, that works really well. And if the fabric is really fine, like a silk or a high quality voile, sometimes a hand rolled hem is really the most beautiful option. It takes more time, but the result is beautiful. It's nearly invisible and it has no stiffness at all. So, this is the same kind of hem you'll see on like a really nice silk scarf, for example. They often have hand rolled hems. Another option you can do is a baby hem, which is similar to a rolled hem. It's just like a really, really tiny hem. And we have tutorials on, I think, pretty much all of these things on our YouTube channel if you want to check that out and see these in action. The principle here is the same as it is with seam finishes. So you want to match the hem to your fabric. So a hem should enhance the drape and not fight against it. And that's the most important thing. All right, well, let me recap the tips that we had for you today for sewing with lightweight fabric. Number one, stabilize your fabric before cutting. You want to use weights, you want to cut single layer, and you want to use spray starch if your fabric can handle it. Number two is to prevent puckered seams. So you want to use the right needle, you want to lower your tension a little bit, and use a stabilizer underneath if you need that. Three is to choose the right seam finish. Here, French seams are often your friend, but you have other options as well. You just want to choose a seam finish that works with a lightweight fabric. Number 4 is to press without distortion. So you want to lower the heat, use a press cloth, and always use an up and down motion, not side to side. And number 5 is choose a hem that works with the drape. That includes narrow rolled hems, hand rolled hems, baby hems, or using a rolled hem foot. All right. Well, that was a lot of tips. I think my big takeaway from this episode is something we talk about a lot, which is I think the right tools and the right techniques can solve almost any sewing frustration that you have. And I don't think lightweight fabrics are inherently difficult. They just have different needs than maybe some of the fabrics you're more used to sewing. And once you know what those needs are, you can kind of work with the fabric instead of against it. And you can find those tools and those techniques that are going to help you the most with that particular fabric. What about you, Haley?
I think that's like a wonderful takeaway. And I think a lot of times we avoid sewing things that we think are challenging because we think it's some kind of like deficit in our own skill when really it's just the like you don't have the knowledge yet of the correct tools and techniques. One way that you can really make this seem more approachable for yourself is to choose a project that you've made before,
Mm-hmm.
that you know all of the skills already, all of the construction techniques that you need in order to make that, and then try making it in a fabric that's more challenging to you. I also recommend something like a separates, like a top or a skirt, simply because then you're not wrestling with like 6 yards of really lightweight fabric. But I think that using all of these tips that we recommended to you today, paired with a familiar pattern, is an excellent on ramp for sewing with lighter weight fabrics.
Yeah, that's a That's a really, I think, important point when it comes to not just working with lightweight fabrics, but any kind of
Yeah.
challenge in sewing, any kind of thing where you feel like you have a skill deficit. And speaking of hems, which you just talked about, we talked about how important it is to match your hem to your fabric. And I know that it can feel like a lot to keep track of, especially when you're working with different weights and different types of fabrics across projects. So we put together a hem guide cheat sheet that I think you're really going to love. So it includes our top troubleshooting tips for hems. So things like how to fix wavy hems and how to deal with bulk and how to get a clean finish on your curves, plus a handy chart that helps you pick exactly the right hem for your project based on your fabric type and the garment style. It's free and it's the kind of thing that you can keep right next to your machine so you're not guessing. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes so you can grab it. I think it's really, really helpful. I think these kinds of cheat sheets are really helpful just to keep in your sewing room somewhere where you can reference it whenever you need it. And if you liked this episode, we would love to hear from you. We'd love it if you would leave us a review either on Apple Podcasts or you can leave us a comment on Spotify. Those reviews on Apple Podcasts really, really help other people to find the show. So we super, super appreciate them. You can also find us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to become part of the Seamwork community, head over to seamwork.com and learn how to join. Well, that's it for us this week. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.